Hello! It's been an exciting couple of weeks. I've done quite a lot, in fact. So I'll try and get through this video really quick and just briefly show you all the things that I've been doing just to keep you up to date. So the first things first. I received the license files for my DataMiner the day after I requested them. So if I didn't have my little side quest, I would have probably installed everything much quicker. So I did that now. So I used those license files. I put them on the correct location, and that was actually all that was left to do to finish the installation of DataMiner, the beating heart of my smart home. Well, if I get my eventual home, of course. DataMiner, when I first wanted to log in, DataMiner is a website, or you can use it as a website, but it requires something called Xbox in the background to run. Now, unfortunately, the only browser that still actually supports Xbox is the really old Internet Explorer. So if you want to access DataMiner the old way, the way it has been happening for many years, you kind of have to use Internet Explorer. However, there is already a much nicer and much better way to actually use DataMiner, and that's by installing a launcher on the client. I'll show you that later. First things first, I'm going to use the classic way, the old way, to do the very first login on DataMiner. Now, here I ran to a little snag, as it were, because I didn't really know what my login is supposed to be during the installation. I didn't really set anything up. So how do I get through this? Well, this is a common issue, and it has a relatively easy fix. What you have to do is you have to activate the Windows default administrator account. So Windows has by default an administrator account. It's usually disabled when you first install the operating system. However, in the settings of Windows, you can actually enable this. Once you've done that, you can actually also, well, you probably should, add a password and a username to it. Well, not a username, that's the administrator, just a password. But using that account, you can now actually successfully log in. So using Internet Explorer, I can browse to the DataMiner. I'm just going to do localhost because I'm on the remote desktop. I'm actually on the server there running the DataMiner. And when I log in, the first thing I want to do before I go through the entire UI, or at least parts of it, I want to set my authentication, so that I don't actually need to use the administrator account. I can use my own personal account. So doing that relatively simple. You just go to the correct options, the correct configuration, users, roles, groups, all of that, and I just create a new user of an existing one. So an existing local user that I had on the Windows setup, I just use that, I add it to the DataMiner system, and I'm good to go. At that point, I can use my local user to actually log in. So that was step one. However, I mentioned the launcher. The launcher is not much nicer to actually use, to actually, that's the modern way, that's the new way to open up DataMiner, and it's the recommended one. So I got the installer for the launcher through Skyline Communications to my company itself. The launcher will, however, be available for download somewhere on our website soon, I would imagine. But I already have it. So this is kind of a sneak preview, a sneak peek to that new launcher. So on my personal computer, I have installed the launcher, and I can simply fill in the IP address of my remote DataMiner, use the launcher, log in, and bam, I'm inside of my beating heart. I'm inside of DataMiner. Now, how does all of this work? Well, I won't go through the entire numerous features of DataMiner. I'll go through them as I use them. And the first thing I'm going to use is protocols. Protocols are the basis of a DataMiner setup. What do I mean by that? Well, protocols are pretty much the drivers of our system, and a driver is a normal programming term, and it means a program that knows how to communicate with a data source or with a device. So a driver is a piece of program that knows how to talk to a device or a data source. And all drivers, we call those protocol.xml. So those are just XML files that pretty much tell DataMiner, well, this is how you talk to specific devices. Now I need one of those. The first one I want is well, you know how they say, doctor, heal thyself. I need something to diagnose my own server. So I want DataMiner to monitor its own server for memory, CPU, and trend, all of that, and the disk space and all of that, so I can get alarms if something goes wrong on my local server. So the first thing I want to do is install Microsoft Platform. Now, this is an existing driver. Skyline Communications has a massive database of existing drivers. So I asked my company, can you please provide my account with the access to download that? So they provide me the access, and how you actually download it? Well, inside of our software, inside DataMiner, you go to the update center, and in there you'll see a list of all the drivers you are eligible to download. So I just click Microsoft Platform, I download that one, and suddenly I have on my system the ability to start monitoring an entire Windows platform, an entire Windows operating system. And that's what I'm going to do. And how do you do that? Well, you do that by creating an element. An element is key within the DataMiner system. What is an element? An element is a specific item that represents a device or a data source. So I'm going to be creating an element that is using the driver that I've just downloaded to talk to my local machine, to talk to the Windows operating system. So I'm creating an element for my smart home to actually monitor the server itself. And once I've done that, I'll go through some templates. What are templates? Well, first of all, I create the element and I have a look if everything actually runs. So I fill in the IP of my local host, I make sure that all the settings are correctly done, and once everything is done, I open up the element and I get a nice UI, a nice overview with a whole bunch of metrics and statistics. That's awesome. Next step, like I mentioned, is templates. What are templates? Well, I want alarm templates and trend templates, so I go into the templates section of DataMiner and I design an alarm template that I'm happy with, meaning I want to get some critical alarms, I want to get some major alarms, I want to get something to pop up, something to tell me if, for example, my disk space is getting too small. If I'm running out of disk space, this will tell me relatively quickly without me having to manually check the disk space. Same with CPU. If I get spikes in my CPU that are too high, I want to know about it. Memory as well. If my memory is too low, I want to know about it. So I set up all of these things. I also set up something called trending. So I enable the ability to save lots of data points over time into the Cassandra database, which is, if you remember previous videos, the database I installed previously. So I set all of this up and bam, I have my very first element on my DataMiner that will be on there forever and ever. I am now monitoring my own server within DataMiner. That's great. Next step is, well, I really want to use an actual smart home device. So I bought one. I bought a single one just to test it out. It's called the Shelly 1PM. Now, what is the Shelly 1PM? The Shelly 1PM is actually nothing but a simple Wi-Fi relay. So it's a small device, it's a relay, it's a switch on, off. But it also does temperature monitoring and it also does power monitoring. So I can tell how much how much power is actually being used that goes through that relay. Now, where do I put that relay? Well, here's the awesome part. Now, this is just a test, but if it works for this one, then this could be the core of my entire smart home setup. I could end up buying 50 of these little things and installing them all throughout my house. Because where do you install them? You install them directly behind a power socket. So any power socket that you'd want to monitor how much wattage, how much am I using it, how much power is it using, or any socket that you can disable the power to, well, you put that behind it. That means if in theory I were to put that behind every single power socket in my new house, which would be an investment, sure, but doing that would make sure that any single device I hook up has suddenly become a smart device. No matter if the device itself can access Wi-Fi or has the capability of an API or being able to, doesn't matter, because that one relay will make it a smart device. I'll be able to enable it, disable it, set timers. I'll be able to monitor also the usage of it, how much, the temperature, all of that. So it's awesome. If this works, it'll be freaking awesome. So that's what I ended up doing. I needed to do a little bit of hardware again, so I ended up Checking, I won't go through the technical details too much, just, the Shelly 1PM, you just need to wire it up a little bit. So wiring it up, I use the correct wire to make sure it can handle the voltage on the 220 volts. And power goes in over here, and then the power goes out on the left, and that one goes to the socket input, and then the output of the socket is the same as the output of the Shelly 1PM. So you can see that on the image here. So I set all of that up, and then I need to plug it into a wall, of course. And we're dealing with electricity here, we're dealing with quite a lot of voltage, so safety first. So we begin by turning off the power for that particular socket. Okay, so we begin by turning off the power for that particular socket. So we begin by turning off the power for that particular socket. So we begin by turning off the power of the entire house, just so we're sure and we're safe. Once I've done that, and do pardon the graphics on the video here might not be the best, because I did for some reason want to do that in the dark at night. I don't know why I figured I wanted to do all of this configuration and all this stuff at night. I don't know, because I just did. Anyway, I hook everything up. And I use the application of Shelly itself at first to do the initial setup. So what I set up is I want to make sure it has a static IP address, and I want to make sure that everything actually works, and yes, it does. So I can access these things using the Shelly app itself. However, that's not what I want to do. I want to integrate it into my DataMiner. So this is the central place where everything's gonna go eventually. So I need to make a new driver, because the Shelly doesn't have a driver yet. So I'll go through how I created a driver, or how that is done in a future video, but let's just say I made a very basic driver. I download it, I put it on my DataMiner, and I make an element. I point it at the static IP address of my Shelly 1PM, and bam, I get information. The thing is, damn, it's working, and I am so excited and happy. I have been monitoring that progress for a while now to see if it doesn't heat up too much, if I'm happy with it, how the connection, all of that is. I'll be improving the driver later, adding more data to it, because right now it's just basic information that I'm retrieving from that little device. I'm gonna leave it at this for today's video. A lot has happened, it's been great, and I will catch all of you later. Goodbye.